Hopefully that helps. Okay. Yes.
So I work with volleyballers.
Yes.
And you start like warm-ups at like 7 a.m. and then they warm up for an hour and then they play for an hour, they're off an hour, play for an hour, off an hour. The last game they aren't as energetic and we make them food back. And we try to make like a good mix of like proteins, some healthy carbs, fruits, a little bit of pretzel, cheese kind of situation.
Yes.
But I'm wondering if there's like some kind of combination that we're missing or something that you can think of as like a superfood.
Yeah.
Get that like kind of slack jaw, like
Yep.
we're really tired, but I look across the net and those girls look like they're doing good, and I don't think they've had as good of food as we've had. So
Gotcha.
what am I doing nutrition-wise?
So the question was, with volleyball team, there's a lot of warming up matches back to back to back, and you got these little spurts of opportunity to get food in, but by the end, the fatigue is really starting to look, those energy levels, we're all up and down. It sounds like some of the things that you're doing from the nutrition interventions, like food choices, like is not way off. I would maybe look at what are they doing before the 7 o'clock warm up? How much of an energy intake are they pulling in? Because if it's an hour warm up, they can probably stand and have a bigger breakfast going in. So they might be already coming in at half a tank and they're already starting, and you're trying to slow that down, but the foundation's been laid at the start. So that's where my mindset, when you were telling me that, is like, well, if it's an hour warm up and then they start going, it's not like they just boom go into play. Maybe really start emphasizing maybe having a big, more well-rounded breakfast that's fairly energy dense, but is comfortable to them.
So I eat eggs.
Eggs could be a part of it, but that'll be your protein option. But you want to find more of your carbohydrate-rich type stuff. So your oatmeals, a lot of different fruits. You could even look at some of those more whole grain for your cereals, because if depending on your situation, if you need, logistically, it's just easier. Yep. Some of those different things. But yeah, you can then look at Greek yogurts where you're adding granola with it as part of it, and putting those different, bread, whole wheat toast, those types of things. But that way they could put that together. So like, for example, it comes to my mind, they could have a couple slices of whole wheat toast, put a little peanut butter on it, have some eggs, a little bit of Greek yogurt, granola, and some fruit. That's a lot, right? So they may not take all of that, but that could be an option that they're probably having something like that. That's probably more than what they were doing. So that's where I would say, like, if they're coming in, pretty light, and you add 400 calories of some of those options that we talked about with what you're already adding in during, you might find yourself in a little bit better situation there. And I think the other one too, with volleyball being indoors, the hydration component. You get lulled into thinking like you don't need to push the fluids. Yeah. And with some of them sweat rates probably fairly high, that could be possibly another issue with their fatigue by the end of it. Yeah. Yeah. You're welcome. So, for everyone coming in, my name is Aaron Carbuhn. I'm the Director of Sports Nutrition for the University of Kansas here. Again, the whole point of this session, very informal. I want this to be just something that if you've got some questions that you might have for yourself, for your athletes, for where you're set up, some issues that, athletes may have been asking you about nutrition, you're just not sure. Of course, we can always talk about supplements. I love to talk about food and with the supplements, but, throw anything out. I want this to be very just, hopefully I can help you out with something that you're dealing with. Yes, sir. Yes. Yes. So the first question is, what are your best foods for recovery? I think the question then that I would ask for you is, in what aspect of recovery are you looking for?
An endurance athlete or a soccer player.
So for a quick turnaround, so like if you had Yep. So I think the first thing from the recovery standpoint is, what's your energy balance coming off of that session? So we can talk about foods from the inflammation side of it. But more importantly, the first thing in that aspect of recovery is energy replenishment. So what are those foods that work for those athletes that are going to help with that energy replenishment? So if you're talking soccer, a lot of stop and go, a lot of distance, a lot of mileage, same with the endurance. You're going to have to definitely find those ways on interventions from the carbohydrate standpoint. And it doesn't necessarily have to be your processed sugary carbs. It can still be your fiber-rich, complex carbohydrate options. But having those interventions available immediately and then subsequently pretty frequently with the mindset that it needs to start that recovery as quickly as possible. Now, from the inflammation standpoint, you're going to want some of those things. So if it's a quick one, cherry juice always comes as a great option, as a nice intervention because you get the additional carbohydrates, but you also get some of those phytochemical components that can help with some of that free radical production that might be going on there. You can look at some of the other fruits. So like pineapple works really well. And puts that into the mix, any of those berries as well. So long story short, a lot of just if you can throw in, and it doesn't have to be the predominant because you got to focus on carbohydrate as your focus, but a lot of your old school fruits and vegetables, right? Those are going to be really key. Now, the other final piece with that is protein intake. Are they getting just enough protein intake to meet the muscle damage that has incurred from those type of exhausted sessions? And so just making sure there's that protein availability at those times that you're having those subsequent food interventions is what I call it, just those times to put it in. Yes, and you still want to look at your healthy fats to help with some of that inflammation pieces as well. So nuts and seeds, oils, and of course, depending on that turnaround, if it's the evening time, avocado, guacamole would work really well because there's a lot of just energy expenditure, right? So your muscle glycogen can only restore so much within 12, 16, 24-hour time. But there's only 4 calories per gram of carb, right? So the other healthy fat is going to help bring that along to keep that expenditure.
Is that low energy, just literally low glycogen stores that you have after a hard training session or a couple hard games or a long race? Is that what gives you the fatigue?
I think so the question is what gives you the fatigue in those sessions is just the low carbohydrates from those types of endurance sessions. I think that's part of it. I think also there's a neuromuscular component to it. Central nervous system, just more fatigue because you've been firing a lot repetitively for hours and hours. So there's that component to it as well. That could be there. Yep.
In Kansas, what do they do?
So we keep it pretty simple. It's just very carbohydrate driven. So whether if it's a liquid standpoint, it's really just from the palate. So what type of carbohydrates do they prefer? So if it's just more of a sports drink type thing, a chew type thing, some like a little of a crunch of a bar, but something like that. Something that just sits really well. And then if we do have athletes that have any type of stomach issues for those types of things, we use Generation UCAN at times. Yep. Yeah, all that. Just different palates for what they prefer. Yeah, some just like different deliveries. That's really what it comes down to, finding what works best for them. And so we only look for around, again, if you're looking for that time frame, average around 60 grams of carbs. Because if you do too much more, it's just going to sit heavy. That gastric emptying is not going to happen, and it's just going to be a mess. Yes. I'll get to you. Yep.
More vague, I guess.
Yes.
Working with high school athletes who don't.
Oh, yes.
Terrible.
Yes.
And then
Myself included when I was at that age.
Yeah.
We all did.
They look at like an NBA player who are going vegan, and so then they want to go vegan, but
Yes.
they don't have the resources to be vegan, or they don't have the budget to
Correct.
or the chef to make things that they need.
Correct.
How do you
Yep.
encourage, or where do you even start with these
Yep.
athletes to encourage better eating?
So, great question. We got high school athletes. We all know eating habits for high school athletes and youth is not the best. They just eat to what they eat, and they don't eat. They're like birds, and they don't eat. And then they see NBA or professional athletes doing the specific thing. What I would reemphasize to them is that these athletes are in a completely different training age of where they're at in their development. So did they do vegan when they were these kids' age? Probably not. You know what I mean? So it's just like they're at a different stage of where they're at athletically that you aren't. And so that might work for them at their stage of where they're at. But I guarantee you, if they were that same age and they tried to do it, it probably wouldn't have worked out from a palate standpoint and things like that. So how can you help, which is, the billion dollar question, right? If you could get, how are you getting those high school athletes to improve their dietary habits? And it's just like with anything, you have to start with just something that hopefully gets them to stick to build a new habit with nutrition. I think sometimes what we want to get into with nutrition is you got to do this, you got to add this, you got to put this timing component, this amount of here, and it just starts coming just blah, 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 blah. It's just too much and it's just noise. And so you want to reduce the noise and keep it really minimal and keep it simple. And so, the obvious one for high school, right, is breakfast. They oftentimes either just want to sleep to the very last possibility, get to class, and if they do have something, it's like granola bar or something like that. And then they start their day, and by the afternoon, it's not going to be good sometimes. So, sometimes you have to talk to them and put it together in a way that works for them. And what I try to do is put more of an awareness to what their body is doing and try to make that connection. Because I have a lot of our student athletes that they just don't have that body connection of how that nutrition is affecting different parameters of their performance, different parameters of their training. So I try to look at some of those data points and some of these things that are important to them, they pay attention to, and show that this can be influenced by this type of intervention that we're doing with nutrition. And just starting right there. So planting the seed really and trying to get them to put that one connection. So maybe there's a click of, oh, this does make sense, or this does have something to it. But I think you're seeing a lot from the professionals having a lot of different approaches is helping influence that also. I think it's just steering that into the way that is more beneficial for the high school athlete and not a 10-year pro in the league, which is a different ball of wax there altogether. So, yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm a wrestling coach, and so the post-weigh-in, pre-tournament, refuel, what would you recommend, like, get good is an issue?
Yeah, so the question was, we got wrestling, we got the weigh-in, and then we've got to try to get ready going, and it's a short window, and maybe we've done some restrict, to make sure we're getting the number that we need, right? At that point, it's all about performance, right? We want to make sure that athlete is feeling as best as possible energy-wise and be able to put their best foot forward out there with it. So you definitely want to keep good nutrition in there, but you definitely want to make sure that, gosh, are we getting energy levels up? Are we getting hydration levels where they need to be? Is our electrolyte balance where it needs to be to help sustain that continued type of effort that athlete's going to have to do? So it's just, in that situation, we're influencing carbohydrates and body water a lot, right? So that's where you need to put your bucket in, which we all know. So it's just finding those ways that how can we maximize that a little bit better? And so, if we look at it maybe from an electrolyte component, that can help with maybe some of that fluid absorption a little bit better, paired with more of not a complex fiber-rich carb, because that's not going to sit. It's going to cause a lot of GI distress, a lot of bloating, but more of that easy digest, and a little bit more processed, to be honest with you, just to help get it in. That's really what it's all about.
Start adding back the proteins and fats. I mean, I don't have kids that are like super.
Yeah.
So that they're not, they need that, but then I don't want to set them in their stomach.
Yeah, you want to keep protein there, but not a big amount. And the fats, that just delays the emptying a little bit more of the nutrition from the gut getting into the small intestine to start the absorption. So you really want to back that down, because that can cause it's just not going to settle well, and then they're not going to want to keep eating. So you definitely want to keep some protein in, but it's not a big player, in my opinion, for the time frame that you're dealing with. And so that's where my mindset is. If we're dealing with this time frame, we've got to get to where we need to get as quickly as possible. And some of these things are right. They're good food, they're good options, but in the context of what you're talking about, may not be ideal. Yeah. Any other questions you got for me? So again, yes, sir. Yes.
Things like chocolate milk and peanut butter and Uncrustable.
Yeah.
Those, do they have I work with D2 basketball players.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
those have a place in the day.
So the question is Division II basketball, motivation sometimes is lacking in terms of their nutrition and making sure they're taking care of it. Is things like chocolate milk, Uncrustables, an option. So I would say if that's what's going to help keep a rhythm and a routine to the nutrition versus if you didn't have some of those options and they probably just would not do it, then yes. My hope would be as that would continue, you would maybe look at some other interventions. Yeah, chocolate milk could work, sure, but is there enough protein backing for the type of training that they did for 2 or 3 hour practice? I don't know. But if that just keeps that routine in their mind as an opportunity of, I need to make sure I'm including this afterwards, I'm including this option before, as a snack or something like that, then great. Could it be better? Could we improve that nutritional profile of an Uncrustable? Gosh, yes, we could. But, if that's what's going to work for them in a short time, so if you look at a certain phase of the year that, we've got that routine laid, now let's build upon that. Now let's put something else that has a little bit better quality behind it and see how that goes. And so I can use it, and that's basically where I'm coming at, and hopefully that helps with that answer is you're starting with something, and you're building it, and then you can keep improving upon it. Do what? Correct. And so that's where putting it to try to help motivate them that, this is going to help with this part. And they're seeing some of the improvement in terms of recovery, outlook, motivation, their ability to push during the practice instead of just kind of fading and just barely making it through. That's going to help motivate to reallocate maybe some of that funds in the future. That's all you can do in some of those situations, right? Unless you can provide it. So, yeah.
What about the prepackaged program, companies that send their stuff to you, either the ingredients that the person has to make, or the
Like HelloFresh or
HelloFresh, or the companies actually send you
Like all the Blue Apron and stuff? Yeah. Well, look, those are great. Yeah. It's just you're going to pay a convenience for that. It's a convenience thing, right? So you're going to pay a lot more money than if you just had that extra time, which, we all know time is tough for some. But, again, it's definitely a great option. And, if that helps put some things together because you're just not sure where some of those ingredients are, or you can't get it as fresh where you're at from a vendor, that could definitely work. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So any other questions? Yes.
I want to have a football athlete next year. He's type 1 diabetic. I've handled diabetes before, but he has a tendency to dip real low, like just on a dime. I was just wondering, in your mind, what's the best food to keep, in my office for him? What would you think?
Well, I think you'd have to talk to him and kind of see because as you know, with type 1, everyone is totally different in how they respond to different types of food options. So the first thing I would say is really kind of see what his routine blood sugar levels are prior to starting. Because it sounds like if he's cranking down that fast, his blood sugar levels are probably not even on the higher end of the range where they need to be to help offset that. And so that's where kind of seeing what his routines are and what types of carbohydrate foods that he pulls in and maybe readjust it to check those blood sugars prior to starting. Yeah. And so that way you could kind of gauge based on what the training load was and kind of target different levels for what he's going to need. Yeah. Yeah. Are we doing on time? Someone got the clock? Are we doing okay? 54. So anyone have any other questions? Again, this is just a informal Q&A. Yes.
I might have seen it says about 5 minutes
So the question was for bodybuilders, powerlifters, you get done, of course, it's always been preached for years and years and years now. We want protein and then carbohydrates to help with building. A lot of the data is actually suggesting that carbohydrate side is definitely potentially could help with that, but it's just more of a recovery side. Muscle glycogen deplenishment, you want to replenish that back up to help with your energy store. So if you have a quick turnaround of a training session of a bodybuilder doing 2 lifts a day, a morning and an evening session or something like that, that's really going to be important for the carbohydrate. Yep. And the protein is you can definitely pull it in the 20 minutes, but muscle sensitivity and those signals are going to last for a good while. So if that works for the schedule, because I know from a bodybuilder, you need to make sure you're including a certain amount in, and you've got to keep that timing. So if that's part of it, then that's great. But I would look at it from the carbohydrate side more of an energy replenishment to help with work output later on for a quick turnaround.
Have their shake and then just sit down for their meal an hour or two later.
Absolutely, and still be fine. Because if you throw the additional carbs, sometimes those sugars sits heavy, and they're not willing to eat the actual whole food that you would want. So I would rather just take that out and focus on the whole food nutrition behind it. Yep. Yes, sir.
You're running educational programs for adults and youth. So if you were fortunate not college athletes, but a lot of high school, middle school athletes, and you hear parents all the time are like, the kids eat horrible, blah, blah, blah. Can you tell them how to eat? So I always approach the parent, like, well, you're a child.
Yeah.
Do you do the educational stuff for parents and kids together?
No, not really. Yeah, it's not. Yeah, mine is 500 student athletes at Kansas Athletics, so that keeps me pretty busy at time. But you're right on. So the question is you're having high school athletes that are you've had parents ask you, have them eat better, but are we doing any nutrition education for the parents and the athletes? No. So, but that's something that you definitely want to encourage and find, in my opinion, just a good local dietitian that's around that has maybe not in depth sports background, but good exercise background to help coach up the parents. So that way it can start from the top down in their household, because you said it, if the environment is what it is, the kids aren't going to change. I mean, they're just going to keep doing what they're doing. Yeah. So I think we have a couple more minutes. Yes, sir.
Is there a database of nutritionists you can refer to?
Yes, you can go to Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. So it's and.org. Yep. And there's actually a subgroup called SCAN that you can look up that will give you by state those dietitians. Now, we can talk right after this, and I'll give you an even more specific link for more sports and exercise focused that I can give you. So let me touch base with you afterwards. Yeah. Well, I think that about does it. Well, I appreciate your time. Thank you, guys.